everything is just cozy, cozy, cozy. It's either gonna look really good or it's gonna look really sloppy because I do a poor job of it. And it was a little tedious and a lot of things to hold with your needle and then the crochet hook and the yarn, and it was a lot. In today's weather, we have an I-cord V-neck. This is your channel.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for joining me for another podcast episode today. I am so excited to talk through the projects that I have on the needles right now because everything is literally in this stage of like almost being done. It's so close for everything. And so I'm excited to talk about it because it feels almost like we've hit a standstill, even though we haven't. It's just that everything is so close to being done and yet nothing is. So we're like right on the precipice of something very exciting. So today I'm going to be talking to you about 4 WIPS. I have no finished objects, and at the very end of today's video, I will be answering some of the questions that you all left for the Q&A portion after last week's celebration episode. Before I get into everything, I do want to say a huge thank you and just express my sincere gratitude and the absolute like warmth that I have felt over the past week. Reading the comments on that video, I have to tell you that there are so many comments to go through and I am doing my best to get through all of them. But holy cow, did you guys show up, and I'm so appreciative and I'm so glad that you did, because anyone who commented entered for the giveaway. So I will also be announcing the giveaway winners at the end of this episode. I will also make sure that the names are down in the description box below. So if you've won a prize, definitely please be sure to email me. I'll leave all that in the description box. And like I said, we'll get to all of that at the end of the video. I'm excited to talk knitting, so why don't we go ahead and just dive on in. Starting off strong here, I would like to talk about the project that has been on my needles the longest, and that is the Feel Good Cable Sweater by Anne-Catherine Stoll. This is a really cozy, beachy, oversized cable knit sweater that I have made some modifications to suit my needs best. And I am knitting this out of Barocco Ultra Wool Chunky. It's this really sandy colorway that I think is just going to be perfect for transitioning from summer into fall, which is good because that is sneaking up here. So let me actually also pull out a sort of new acquisition that I have to hopefully better show off my knits while I'm talking about them. Ta-da! What do we think? I've seen a lot of comments saying that I should start putting my WIPS on a hanger while I talk about them so that I can just better show what I'm trying to talk about. And I still just felt like me holding a hanger up here was going to be really cumbersome for oftentimes the size of my knits personally. So this is a little, I don't know. You let me know. How do we feel about this? I feel like it's going to be a lot easier for me to just talk about this. I think I will eventually crochet or something that I could put over the hanger part of it to make it a little cuter. But for now, it's a good little setup, I think. So this is my Feel Good cable sweater. I'm really excited seeing it next to me here. I think I like this. So since we spoke last week, a few things have happened. Most notably, I think, is what you're seeing here. Now I feel like a newscaster. In today's weather, we have an I-cord V-neck. That's what I did. I wound up going with, let me back up 2 steps. The original pattern is designed to have a raw hem or raw edge for this V-neck here. And it's a very low, very deep V-neck edge. It's something that you're supposed to just kind of wear very slouchy, always something underneath it. So I wasn't really concerned about the actual like depth of the V-neck. It was more so that the raw edge just didn't look the greatest to me for the proportion of the sweater. And I also felt like it was just such a heavy knit. It's very heavy, this sweater. And so eventually that was just going to fall apart. So I wanted to resolve the V-neck a little bit. I tried so many different options, and what I wound up really liking the best was the I-cord edge, which matches the I-cord that is actually done in the pattern on the back of the neck. So the pattern has the back of the neck just across the back finished with an I-cord, and then the rest is left raw. So I just went through and picked up stitches and finished out the rest of it with an I-cord. Now, something that I noticed I was doing in the little samples that I had done was all of the finishes that I was doing with an I-cord, I was knitting the I-cord and then finishing with a knit two together. And I don't know why I was doing that, because then when I went back and read the instructions for the back of the neck, it's always a slip knit that finishes that I-cord. And I realized that that made a really huge difference for the back side of the I-cord, so that when this does kind of roll open and flip open, as I'm sure it will eventually after wearing it, the back looks way more finished with that slip knit than it did the knit two together. And I'm not sure if it has something to do with the way that that decrease leans. If you know why that is, I would love to know, because in my head, in my minimal experience with I-cords, I assumed that I could just do any sort of knit two together, slip knit, you know, just anything that would resolve the last two stitches of an I-cord edge such that you could bind off as you go. I thought that anything that just sort of made that happen would be fine, but it actually gives you a totally different look from the slip knit to a knit two together on the last stitch of your I-cord, which was exciting to be able to see that in real time. And so I definitely recommend, if you are doing an I-cord edge and your instructions tell you to do one or the other and you're not pleased with how things are looking, maybe try it the other way, because it does give you a really different look, and mostly, like I said, on the back part of it, so the part that actually is on the inside of the sweater. And the reason why the slip knit in particular I think works here is because as it does kind of tend to want to roll open, which I'm hoping will be resolved in blocking, but if it's not, if it does decide to start rolling over, it really does kind of look like a rolled hem, which is how the sleeves are finished. And you may have noticed already that my sleeves are done. So the sleeves are finished with a rolled hem. You knit just stockinette for about, I think, 8 rounds, and then just a standard bind off, which is really satisfying to do after having done so many Italian bind offs or Italian tubular bind offs and all of that. It was really fun to just do a plain old knit over knit cast off. So I was very thrilled to do that. After having tried this on last week, I did decide, and so, okay, so I tried it on last week and I felt like the sleeves were a little too short and I hadn't yet done anything to resolve the V-neck. I went in and I did that I-cord on the V-neck. It's also not totally done. You might see that I have a stitch marker here holding on 3 stitches that I didn't have a needle on me when I finished it, so I didn't yet actually finish off those last 3 stitches of the I-cord and sew them down. But after I had done that, tried this on, still felt like the sleeves were too short, and so I did go ahead and add a good bit of length to the sleeves. My feeling was that I would rather them be too long rather than too short, because this is just supposed to be beachy and cozy. And because this edge is a rolled edge, if I really had to just kind of roll them up, I'm actually not bothered by that at all because of the nature of like how I'll be wearing this knit. So I added a good little bit. I wound up going back to the pattern, and she tells you which row of the cable pattern you should end on, and that's exactly what I had done. So it did work out that I was able to do that and get the length of sleeve that I wanted. I also figured that as far as when this is blocked and everything, as the cables stretch out widthwise, a lot of times that tends to kind of pull them up in length. And so I figured, again, the longer the better. Even though I am also expecting the body to kind of drop a little bit. And so I'm hoping that it all kind of balances out. But if not, I'm not afraid to figure that out when we get there. So for the V-neck, what I had done was I went through and picked up stitches from the point of the V-neck up to the back I-cord edge. And I honestly was just eyeballing a rate because you aren't supposed to pick it up. So I just was kind of making it up as I went. I decided to not pick up every stitch, but I think I did 4 out of 5 stitches was about the rate that I was picking up at. And I knit the I-cord according to the instructions like they were on the back of the neck. Then I went through and picked up from the back neck I-cord down to the V-neck here, because my goal is to have the point of the V-neck kind of create almost just like a little bit of an overlapping situation is what I was picturing. And we'll see. It's either going to look really good because it'll be very tidy from sewing those last 3 stitches off, or it's going to look really sloppy because I do a poor job of it. But again, either way, I'm expecting to maybe have to revisit that entire situation after blocking, because I also found that it's possible I picked up maybe too many stitches. It doesn't seem like this is, I was almost so nervous about it making it too tight and scrunched up that I think I may have gone a little bit in the opposite direction. So it might be a little too loose still, but again, I figured better to be safe than sorry. Let's just stick with it for now. And after I've blocked it, I can see if I have to just pull that out and make a tighter I-cord. I have no problem doing that. I used the needle size that I'd used on the rest of this garment, which is a 6mm needle. And so I could also maybe do the I-cord again and just keep the rate of pickup, but if I just want that I-cord itself to be a little more snug, maybe I'll just drop down my needle size to a 5mm needle or so. And so I can kind of figure that out as I go. Now, I also said that my goal here was to use as much yarn as possible. Ideally, I will have 0 yarn left over from this project. I'm just at this point where I'm kind of sick of having a single ball left over from each project. And I know that there are accessories that I can make with those little leftovers, but I would like to minimize that as much as possible. I find that I just don't make the accessories as much as I would need to make up for all of this leftover yarn that I have. And again, because we're going for ultimate cozy vibes here, I figured if I could just knit until I'm done with yarn, that would be ideal. So I had 1 ball of the Barocco Ultra Wall Chunky left and was looking like I was at about a point where it was even time to start considering how I was finishing off the body of this sweater. So what I had done was I weighed my yarn. I knit, okay, actually I had 1 ball and like a little bit left over after having done the I-cord edge and the sleeves. So when I went back to the body, I weighed all of the yarn that I had left over, but I weighed the ball that I was working from. I knit around and I weighed it again. And what I determined was that a single round in the body used about 5 grams of yarn. Then I deduced that I had about 115 grams of yarn left. So I did 115 divided by 5 and figured out about how many rows I could continue to knit. I considered the fact that this is also finished with a rolled hem. And so I subtracted the sort of 10 rows that's going to eat into that from the overall number, and then counted in my cable pattern kind of where I would be able to leave off. And so at the moment, it is looking like I'm going to be able to knit until that cable row that she tells you to in the pattern, and then start my stockinette rows for the rolled hem to bind off. The good news is too, if my math didn't turn out quite right, which I left a bit of wiggle room in there, I can always just take out one of those stockinette rows. You're not really going to notice it, especially considering how long this is going to be. So I think that that is going to work out. I'm really fingers crossed, hoping that I wind up with just, a scrap of this left over. And then I'll feel okay about tossing that into the scrap pile or in the trash, depending on just how much it is. So that's where we're at now. I actually almost felt like I could have finished this last night if I just powered through, but I had done quite a bit of knitting yesterday and I was over it at that point. So I put this aside. I will measure the progress that I made because I do have a progress keeper on here, which you can see right here. So since last week, I've knit from the progress keeper down, looks like just about half of a cable repeat. So it looks like since last week, I've made about just under 6 inches of progress here. And I'll be sure to flash up a photo of what the sweater looked like last week. And so if we can assume that those 6 inches are added on, plus what's going to be about, I think, another 3 to 5 inches or so with what I have left, I feel like the length of this sweater will be that ultimate cozy vibe that I'm going for, very similar to what she has in the pattern, where it really does fully cover the bum. Everything is just cozy, cozy, cozy. So I love this. You can see here that I-cord in the back now. Wow, we love our little setup here. And I actually feel confident just taking the progress keeper off of this one to use on a different project, because I am pretty certain this will at least be blocking by next week. And so we won't be needing that anymore. So that is all I have. Oh, I forgot to tell you even how long it's been on the needles. This one's been on the needles for 39 days today, and she's coming to a close. I don't know that I'll get to it today, but certainly within the next couple of days, this will be done. And I have to say, it's been a joy to knit. I said that the pattern was not my favorite, but it's also not my least favorite. It's just a little bit scarce in the explaining. So if you have knit cables before, if you have knit a drop shoulder sweater before, if you've knit a V-neck sweater before, you're gonna be totally fine with this one. It's not that it's bad. It's just not going to hold your hand. And so just keep that in mind as you're going. But really do absolutely love what we're creating here. Can't wait to see it done. That is the Feel Good Cable Sweater by Anne-Catherine Stoll. On the needles today, 39 days. Next up, for projects that have been on the needles for a little bit, I'm going to talk about my Tulsa tanks, which are 2 separate versions of the same pattern by Rebecca Clow of the Crayabea. I am knitting both the fingering or 4-ply version as well as the DK version. The DK one has been on the needles a little bit longer. It was actually done, blocked, ready to go, and I wasn't very happy with it. And so I ripped back and I've made some changes. And then the fingering weight one is a little bit newer, and it is simply I'm actually going to start calling it my handbag knitting, because that is exactly what it is. So let us check those out. So this one's not going to be nearly as satisfying to see on the hanger, and now you can also see that I've just kind of makeshifted something to keep these garments on the hanger. But this is the DK cami version of the Tulsa tank. I have knit the front as the cami, the back as the back of the vest version, and I am knitting this in the size 4 with 0 bust shaping. The way I had done it when I wasn't happy was with the bust shaping, and I just found that that does not work for my measurements. So I'm trying this again, and I've just been kind of doing this a little more slow and steady because it is pretty quick. So it's a bottom up knit. I'm knitting mine on 4.5 millimeter needles, even though the pattern says 5 millimeter needles. This is how I got the best gauge that I was happiest with the fabric. It's a mercerized cotton that I thrifted. The brand is called Alina. I haven't been able to find it anywhere, so I think it's a discontinued yarn. But it's bottom up. And so when you get to the point where you're splitting for the underarm, that's kind of what you're seeing here, where the side is a little bit more done. You cast off those stitches for the underarm, and then you work the front and the back separately. And the thing is that on the back, you do actually work a little bit more kind of all at the same time, just flat back and forth. Especially because this is that crew neck back, the vest back, where it's a higher back. And so you are just kind of knitting back and forth once you've split for the underarm. And then you only veer off to knitting these like little tiny straps once you get to the top. And then for the V-neck one, for that cami, you split for the underarms, and then you're also immediately splitting for the front two panels. So essentially what I've kind of done is I took one day and just sat down and dedicated time to knitting that back. I took another day and just sat down, dedicated time to knitting this right front side. And now I'm just gonna have to take another day and finish up the left front side, at which point you sew the front and the back to each other, and then it should be done according to the pattern. At that point, I'm going to block it, and I will decide then if I feel like I still need a bit of an I-cord edge, something to finish off the edges. If that is the case, I'm thinking I will do the same finishes that the Sailor Swift top by Veronica Lindbergh has. I really like the way that those I-cord edges were done. And so I'm thinking that that's what I'll do to finish this out if it needs it. So hopefully by next week, I'm at the very least sitting here in the same state that we were a few weeks ago with the finished object, just with all raw edges. Again, as the pattern is written, the only change that I really did make was that at the bottom, there is supposed to be ribbing in the pattern, and I just didn't do that. So yeah, that's where we're at here. Not really much to say. This has just been hanging out on the needles for 26 days. Super quick knit if you don't have to finish and restart. Now, the other Tulsa that I have is really undecided yet what the top will be, since they are all bottom up. But this is the 4-ply version in Drops Fabelle, so a sock yarn in this red colorway that I'm really loving. I'm knitting this one on 2.5mm needles, also in the size 4. The difference is that for the cami version and that DK version, I'm going for something that's just a little bit more reminiscent of like a silk cami. And then for this version, I'm going for something that's a little bit more snug, maybe negative ease on it, but also just not caring too much about it because this is just my purse knitting. So I've been leaving this in my bag and just knitting on this when I'm out and about and I have a few minutes too and I didn't bring anything else with me, or I just need something that's in the round and easy peasy I could do without looking, or for watching soccer. So I have yet to put a progress keeper on this. I made maybe an inch of progress on it over the past week, but I will definitely go ahead and put a progress keeper on here. The one thing I just remembered that I wanted to share is that I don't know if it's these needles. So these are 2.5mm needles. They are the Mindful collection by Knitter's Pride and the fixed circular version. And so the needles are a different feeling from the Knitter's Pride Nova Platina needles that I use for the rest of my projects. And the Mindful cords that I use for the rest of my projects are the interchangeable cords, and they have a swivel tip, whereas the fixed ones don't swivel. They just have that no memory, very comparable to Chow Goo. And something that I've noticed, I don't know if it's just this yarn in particular, on this material in particular, the amount of times I've gone to kind of pull my stitches over and I have wound up just pushing them totally off of the needles. I've done it multiple times, and so it's a little bit frustrating for a project that's supposed to just be my in the round sort of I'm not looking knitting to have done that so many times. So that's kind of been my only issue so far. Again, I don't know if it's these needles or the yarn or what's going on here, but I've never done that before as many times as they have in this one project. So I just thought that I would mention that today. Anyway, this is still just nothingness. It's going to be till we get to the underarm, so it's going to be a little bit till we have anything going on here. But as of today, this one's been on the needles for 19 days, and I will go ahead and put a progress keeper on now. The final WIP that I will be sharing with you today is my Vest Claire Clear Vest by Mochi Knits. Very sweet little trendy sort of styled open front button closed vest, a little summer top. These tops are very, very in style right now. And I'm knitting mine out of Nora Asagi Nu, which is a Japanese paper and French linen blend yarn. It's the most interesting texture I have ever knit with. It's not the easiest to knit on, but the fabric is so exciting that I just can't help myself from working on it. This is another one I did forget to put a progress keeper on, so I'll have to add this week. But I'm kind of hoping that this one will also be maybe close to being done by next week. So let's take a peek. This is another one that's probably going to be a little bit tricky to show off even still on the hanger. The reason being though is because my needles are here in the middle of a row where I ran out of yarn, and I decided that when I ran out of that ball of yarn, I really wanted to go and start doing the finishes for the armholes on this vest. And I had to make a decision. Did I want to finish out the row and then snip the yarn again, which just means more yarn joins? Or am I okay with putting up with the fact that I am in the middle of a row? That was the decision that I made, for better or worse. But that does mean that I have finished one of the armholes here, which is really exciting because this was a technique that I was eager to try. So I'm knitting my vest in the size extra large, and I got gauge in my gauge swatch for the stitches, but my row gauge is off by 5 stitches. So the pattern gauge for the rows is 37 rows per 4 inches, where I'm getting 32 rows per 4 inches, which meant that I had to do a little bit of math to make sure that all of the proportions as far as like armhole depth, V-neck depth, were all going to work out as close to possible, as close as possible to the way that they are in the pattern. Now, I didn't know how much this would influence the rest of this garment, so the armholes and all of that. But what I decided was, when I read the instructions for the armholes, so you pick up around the arms and then you're knitting and stockinette for a few rows, and it's actually a sewn with a crochet hook sort of bind off. I've done this, I believe, once before in the collar of my Minto sweater, and that collar is one of those things that really bugs me because I wound up doing it crooked, and it does really frustrate me when I look at it, but I also just haven't had the motivation to go back and fix it. So I had that in mind when I was doing this edge. But it's interesting because you actually pick up your stitches from the wrong side, knit that stockinette, and then you're folding the fabric back to the outside where you have the right side of the fabric, and you're inserting a crochet hook through the actual seam of the armhole where you picked up the stitches. You're scooping your stitch off of the needle and then basically pulling up yarn on your crochet hook as if it is like a slip stitch or a single crochet, and then pulling it through so that on the inside of the fabric you're seeing that slip stitch edge, but on the outside of the fabric it creates those bars as if it's been sewn. Now, again, my row gauge was off, so she gives you the number of stitches to pick up around the armhole, but doesn't tell you a rate. And I decided that because the armholes are mostly made up of rows and not stitches, I should probably adjust the amount of stitches that I pick up so that I'm not picking up according to her row gauge, where there's going to be more stitches around to pick up because she has more stitches in her 4 inches than I do in my 32 stitches and 4 inches versus 37 stitches and 4 inches. So I hope that that makes sense. If she's telling me a number that I have to pick up around the armhole according to the fact that she's 37 stitches and 4 inches, if I pick up that same number, it will be too many. So the math that I did to kind of do my best to guesstimate the amount of stitches I should pick up, considering the fact that the armhole is made up of the stitches under the arm, which are horizontal, for which I'm on gauge, and then the front and the back, which are made up of rows where I'm off gauge. I took that number of stitches that she gave me to pick up. I subtracted the amount of stitches that we cast on under the arm, so that stitch where I'm on gauge, I subtracted that from the whole pickup number. From there, I found the percentage. So what percent of 37, the row gauge, is 32, my row gauge? I think that that number was around 86% or so. And then I found out what number is 86% of that new number of stitches to pick up. So she tells you the number of stitches to pick up. Let's just call it 100 stitches to make this easy, minus the stitches that were cast on under the arm, because we're both on the same gauge for stitches. So let's just say that that was 10. So I did 100 minus 10, 90. And then I said, so what's 86% of 90? And then that was the amount of stitches that I figured I would have to pick up on the vertical sections, plus picking up those stitches under the arm. I don't know that that was the best move. That was what made the most sense to me. I know that was a little math heavy, so I might have lost you on that one. But in case you were curious, that was how I came to the number that I did, which wound up being just, I mean, a very marginal amount. I think it was 15 or so stitches less than what I was originally told to do. So I went through and I picked up that number of stitches. After picking it up, I was nervous that I had maybe not picked up enough stitches, but I figured, again, I can always take this out and redo it. Went through, picked it up, knit the few rows that I had to, 4 rows, and then did the fold over with the crochet hook. Now she tells you in the pattern to be careful not to pull that too tight, because you really can just start really cinching and cinching and cinching the armhole if you're really crocheting it down too snug. That's another thing I know I did in my Minto, is that where that seam is, it has really zero give to it at all, whereas the actual folded edge has plenty of give to it. So you just have to be careful with your tension. I also figured that because my yarn is a paper, it has zero give to it. There is no give to this yarn. It is paper. So I was particularly careful about my tension. So much so that I used the recommended needle size for the pickup, which I think was a 3mm needle, whereas the rest of this is knit on 3.5mm needles. But then my crochet hook, she also says to use a 3mm needle, and I actually used a 4mm needle. I just wanted to be really careful about making sure that my crocheted slip stitches were tall enough and long enough that that was the amount of give I was going to get out of them, because there was zero stretching that out in post in blocking. That's not happening. In doing so, it took a little bit of time to get this one armhole done, and it was a little tedious and a lot of things to hold with your needle and then the crochet hook and the yarn, and it was a lot. And I like the way that it looks. I'm very pleased with the clean finish. That's one of the things that drew me to this pattern in the first place. Where I'm not sure just yet how things are going to turn out, and it's just going to be a matter of blocking, which this is going to be steam blocked only, is, did I do it too loose? Plot twist. I may have either still picked up too many stitches or was so careful that I made this too loose. I'm going to wait until it's seam blocked to decide, and again, I can always just rip it out and do it over again. It took a couple of hours, so in the grand scheme of things, really not crazy, but I'm not sure yet. I don't feel as though I'm sold on the way that I had done it. Technique was greatly explained. The video was extremely helpful. She also has a layout of photos in the pattern on exactly what you're supposed to do, but has a link to the video too. So very hand-holdy in that aspect. It's just a matter of like, there's a lot of things going on. You're trying to hold a lot of things at the same time. And so we will see. I am going to go ahead and just do the same thing to the other armhole. And the reason I wanted to do those armholes before finishing the body is because I thought it might cinch things up a little bit. And so I didn't want to determine the length of the vest before that all happened. So once the other armhole is done, I can go ahead and determine the length of the vest. I also will jump really quick to an acquisition that I made, which was some potential buttons. I got these ones just on Amazon. I have been looking and looking and looking in yarn shops and thrift shops, all of the things. And I just haven't found anything that I really love. I'm very picky about a button. I'm not looking for something that has too much contrast. So I'd like something that is a fairly neutral brown color. And I don't want a wooden button because I think it might take the paper vest thing a little bit too far in the like organic dystopian future. Little too, what's the word? Primitive, maybe? No wooden buttons for this one. I'd like a shell button, I think, but I didn't love the way that like a coconut shell button looked. I felt like it was, again, a little too primitive, a little too like granola. And so something that has like a little bit of a shine to it. I found these ones on Amazon and I kind of liked the idea of them. If nothing else, they might be a good placeholder. I don't know that I'm sold on the color. It's a little bit more of a taupey, earthy brown, where this is such like a rich chocolate. But mostly my issue here is that they are resin and they're so sheeny shiny and so plastic looking up against this gorgeous organic paper. So I'm struggling a little bit to find just the right button. It also has to be the right size. I think that the pattern says to do 3 buttons. I'm going to kind of figure out if I want 3 or 4 for the most comfortable coverage. So I picked these up in case. I like the buttons themselves, so I think that I'll keep them anyway. And like I said, they might just be a good placeholder so I can wear this for the last few weeks of summer until I find just the right buttons. So if you have a recommendation for somewhere where I could find a horn button that's not $40, a shell button, not the opal pearlescent mother of pearl buttons, something that is neutral, brown, beige, I don't know, not too high contrast. I'm really struggling with this one. So if you have a recommendation, I'd love to know where you find your buttons. And for now, I will just hang on to these ones. And if they wind up being the buttons for this temporarily, that's fine. So for now, let's put a progress keeper on this guy. As of today, it's been on the needles for 15 days. I hadn't put a progress keeper on last week, so I can't tell exactly how much I've done, but I know not a ton. So the next steps for this guy are finishing out this other armhole, trying to do exactly what I had done on the first one, and then going through determining the exact length. I know, pretty close to the length. If you know, I've been trying this on as I've gone, because the next thing I have to be aware of is that in the front, there's this really sweet detail of these decreases where the whole front kind of comes down and then it just opens up a little bit at the bottom, which I really like. So I want to make sure that that's placed just right. So once the other armhole is done, I can determine just how much further I have to go before we start decreasing, but it is really close. And I'm feeling a lot more confident now than I was before with yarn. I just broke open that new ball to do this armhole, and so I'll have to do the other armhole still. But even after that, I still have another full ball of yarn. So I actually think we're doing pretty well on the yarn front. And yeah, that is my Claire vest by Mochi Knits. Been on the needles for 15 days. See what I mean now, where everything is just sort of like about to be done and yet nothing is done? Oh, So maybe next week will be a really exciting episode. I am hoping to get one of these things off of the needles and then cast on the next high priority item for my summer knitting. And we will just see when that all fizzles out. I don't know yet. But having just raved so much about Mochi Knits, I think it is a good time to announce some giveaway winners. Again, thank you to everyone who commented on last week's video. Genuinely, I can't even tell you how lovely it was reading the comments. Sweetest, you guys are just the coolest people ever. So thank you for being here. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for subscribing and participating in this giveaway. So let's go ahead and start with our pattern giveaway winners. Now, as of the time I'm filming this, it is not yet that cutoff time for comments, so I will be putting the names on the screen, but I think we should go ahead and start with the winner of the Lily Kate France pattern giveaway. Thank you, Lily, for generously donating a pattern. And again, these are patterns of your choice to the winner. So if your name is on the screen, please email me. My email is in the description box and we will get the pattern to you. So this is the winner for the Lily Kate France pattern. Congratulations. We have 2 winners of Mochi Knits patterns. So that's the designer of that clear vest that I just showed you. And I cannot recommend the writing style enough. So 2 winners of Mochi Knits patterns. Thank you so much, Mochi Knits, for donating these patterns. Here are our 2 winners. And we also have 3 winners for the Knitonomy Magdalena Parker patterns. Thank you so much, Magdalena, for donating these 3 patterns for our winners. So the 3 winners are on the screen here. I'll also just list all of those names right here. So please email me if you see your name on the screen. And certainly if you did not win this time around, I definitely recommend that you go check out these designers. They're such thoughtfully written patterns and some of just my favorite designs overall. So thank you so much to them for contributing these patterns. I will also go ahead and announce the winners for our Teddy Blake coin purses. So let's just go ahead and throw those names on the screen here for the blue, black, and gold winners. Yay! Congratulations to all of our winners, but don't forget that everyone did win in last week's podcast because Kutova Kika Veronica Lindberg has super generously offered us a 50% discount on all of her patterns. You could use that on her Ravelry or her web shop. The code is Nora, capital N-O-R-A, for 50% off. You can use that code on a full cart of patterns on Ravelry. However, I have noticed that once you purchase a pattern, you can't use the code on Ravelry again. So make sure that you stock up your cart with all the patterns that you want from her. However, if you feel like you missed out on one, you can use that code again in the web shop. So I'll link those down below for you, but that code is active until August 31st. So definitely, if you've had your eye on any of Kutova Kika's patterns, you could use that code up until August 31st. So thank you so much, Veronica, for giving that. You guys are all winners, like I said. So generous of these amazing designers. I'm so grateful to them. All right, now, like I said, we did my very first Q&A in last week's episode, and I have so many questions that came in. I'm only going to answer as many as I can today. However, let me know if you think it's a good idea. I thought maybe the ones that I don't get around to answering, I could keep in a folder, and maybe as we do the try it on tubing and chat segment, we could kind of keep that as a bit of a Q&A, and I could answer some questions while doing that segment. Let me know what you think. If you would like to see that, then I have no problem doing that because there's so many questions. I don't think I could ever answer them all, but I did try to grab the ones that were the most commonly asked and certainly the ones that I've seen asked before. So I'm going to read them off my phone. I hope you don't mind. Okay. let's just start out with a bang with the two probably most commonly asked questions. The first one is about the farm that I live on. So I always say that I come to you from a small farm in Connecticut, and everyone really wanted to know if it's an animal farm or a food farm. It is an animal farm. You will see on Instagram a lot of the times I will post photos of the cute animals around here. So there are pigs, horses, rabbits, the occasional goat and cow. And the best part is that it is not my farm. We just live on it, so we don't have to take care of the animals. We just get to enjoy their really sweet nature, and it's fun to have them around. So yes, it is an animal farm, and the animals are adorable. Also, OC loves the animals. She's particularly fascinated when the pigs have babies and we go visit the little litters of babies, and they're so cute, and she could just sit there and watch them all day. She loves them. The other question was definitely like an all-in-one question about editing and the graphics and all of those things. So I figure I would kind of just bundle all this together, but I also had a lot of questions of people asking about the gear that I use. I don't want to bore those of you who aren't into the gear. So in case you're curious, I'll leave the names of things down in the description box, but I do use a Sony camera with a Sigma lens. I use a Rode shotgun mic. So that's always above me when I'm filming, and I edit my videos in Adobe Premiere Pro. I also make my graphics using a combination of Adobe Firefly and Canva, Procreate, and then just so I do all the editing myself. Thank you so much to those of you who asked if it was professional. Someone asked how I started editing, and honestly, I just jumped into it, which also brings me to the point that I wanted to say, if you have a podcast, if you're thinking of making a podcast, you certainly do not need all of this fancy gear. I can tell you that I would not have purchased it to create these podcasts solely. I just happen to have them. I've been using all of these same things since day one because I had them already from previous hobbies and stuff. So that's helpful, but you definitely can make a podcast with really great quality with just the right lighting and your iPhone and iMovie. So if that's what you have access to, then please don't feel like you need all of this to make a podcast. I'm really fortunate to have it, and I enjoy using it, and I really enjoy the editing process. I particularly like when I have some time to make the videos a little bit more exciting by really truly going in and grabbing things and really doing like the fun special effects. I do all of that by hand. I don't use any templates or anything like that. So yeah, I just enjoy the editing process. I taught myself, started in iMovie and then moved into Adobe Premiere Pro, and it's another hobby for me. So I really like it. I'm glad that you guys do too. All right, from here I will move into the more specific questions. Those were just the two that I saw everywhere, so I wanted to make sure that I answered them. This one says, are you planning on going to any fiber festivals this year? And I am. I already have my tickets for Cake Palooza, which is that Friday before the Rhinebeck New York Sheep and Wool weekend. My friend Shayla from Black Pearl Magic said that that is a total blast, so we got tickets to go to that this year. I'm still on the fence about Rhinebeck. It just depends on my work schedule, but I am hoping to get there for the Saturday. Oh, I'm just scrolling through. These are in no particular order. This one says, have you experience with modeling? Your photo shoots are fab. No, I don't. Thank you so much. If I had to give any tips for doing finished object photos and stuff, what I really like to think about when I want to show off a knit garment is like, what if this garment was in a magazine, how would they kind of style it and pose it and all of that? And then honestly, my favorite photos are just the candid ones. My boyfriend takes all of the photos for me, and we have a lot of fun coming up with the like concepts for the photo shoots, and then when we have the time to actually go do it, it's a lot of fun to do. So another one of those things, like, no, I just like to do things. So thank you though. Oh, okay, this is actually another really big question, and it says, is that your voice singing I'm Nora? It's a very catchy tune and beautiful guitar music throughout. Thank you. There were a few questions that were like that as far as the theme song, and I have answered this in the comments before, but yes, indeed it is me singing, and I made the theme song myself. So yes, that's me. Another knitting question. Is there a fiber that you don't like working with? I think right now, there's nothing that I've worked with that I would say absolutely not. I won't work with that again. Okay, I have one came to mind. It was this fleece yarn. I'll see if I could put a picture up of it. Back early in my knitting career, I tried knitting a baby blanket out of this yarn, and I found that it just stuck to my needles and made a horrible knitting experience. It was not worth it in the stitch definition. I think maybe I was knitting it at too tight a gauge, and I was asking a lot of this yarn. But that kind of like microfibery, fleecy yarn, velvet yarn maybe, I don't know. That's maybe not my favorite. Otherwise, I think my favorite right now is really just 100% wool. The Barocco Ultra Wool is a superwash wool, and I feel like it is pretty adjacent to working with an acrylic wool blend like the Wool Ease from Lion Brand. And so I feel like for the bang for your buck, it just doesn't feel as high quality. And as someone who doesn't mind hand washing their knits, I don't know that superwash is for me, but I'm still experimenting. So yeah, I think that's the only one that right now I'm like, ugh, I know I won't work with that again. Okay, this one says, what was your main hobby before you started knitting and crochet? Do you have any craft-oriented goals for the future? I will say that I am someone who loves to deep dive into a hobby. I've always loved having hobbies. Clearly, music is one of them. Singing is one of them. I got into crochet a few years back. Before knitting, I got really into sewing. Before all of that, I guess also after learning to crochet, I was really into woodworking. And I consider the video editing another hobby that I've really enjoyed. I really like to learn new things. I really enjoy finding new things to do. And really at the end of the day, it's mostly about trying to create the things that I see in my head, because I always have such specific ideas of what I want things to be. And then I can't find those very exact ideas. And so oftentimes it's just me trying to figure out how I can make something to be exactly what I want. So those are the hobbies that I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole of. I'm trying to think if there are any others. It's always something. I've always just been very crafty. Like since a kid, I would be into jewelry making, and I grew up doing origami, and I went to origami conventions with one of my crafty aunts. And so I've just always had a love for making things. And in retrospect, what I've kind of decided and come up with is that my aunt, Barbara, who took me to the origami conventions as a kid, really opened my eyes to making. And I've said that once you look at a sheet of paper and you see a plane, an airplane, you realize that the world is so your oyster, and anything, you could just turn into anything. So my aunt taught me how to see planes in paper, and that was the beginning of the end. Because now I look at yarn and I see sweaters, and I look at a piece of wood and I see a chair, and I love to just create things and get inspired and get creative. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of hobbies. I'm sure that there are going to be a lot in the future. As of right now, I think I'm just so far into my knitting. I even thought I would get into spinning, but I almost feel like that was one of those things that I just saw everyone doing, and I was like, I really want to try it. Haven't had the opportunity to, and it hasn't been as burning in the back of my head. So never say never, but right now I'm just enjoying my knitting and my video editing. Can you tell us how many pieces of knits you have, including accessories? If I'm not mistaken, I think that last year I said in my Everything I Knit This Year video, I think that there were 17 different things that I had made. And then this year, we're probably nearing the 30 mark of things I've made. For myself, we'd probably have to subtract about 4 or 5 of those things. So I would say I probably have about 25 or so knit things. It'll be interesting to see at the end of the year just how many I have. Oh, interesting question. So this says, here's my question, not knitting. What is your favorite anecdote / story from your experience as a bridal hairstylist? So if you didn't know, I'm a bridal hairstylist. I've been a bridal hairstylist for over 10 years now. And I really enjoy, it's just another one of those things. It's another medium. I see hair and it's an updo. So I love doing that. I guess that was a hobby before it was a career. I think that the funniest story that I like to tell, everyone always wants to know the Bridezilla stories, and I'm fortunate that I haven't had many of them. The most kind of dramatic story that I had, it makes me chuckle because it's just such another world that I can't wrap my head around, and I thought that this was really funny. So I was hired to do the bridal hair for a bride. And she also hired me on to stick around the rest of the day to do touch-ups. Not a normal thing that people do, so you already know that this is like a very elevated situation. At cocktail hour, that was kind of the moment where I was able to sneak away while the bride and her groom were doing their own thing for a little bit after having been by their side all day. And so I snuck down to the cocktail hour, and it was the most gorgeous cocktail hour I've ever seen. In the middle of the cocktail hour, next to the ice sculpture, there was this massive fruit tower, like huge. And at the top of the fruit tower, there was this watermelon, and it was carved into a Cinderella carriage. Like mind-blowing stuff. I thought that this was so cool and so amazing. Left cocktail hour, went back to the bride and her groom, and she didn't get a chance to see cocktail hour. So she said, how did it look? And here I am like, oh my gosh, amazing. The ice sculpture, phenomenal. The fruit tower. Like, it was so gorgeous. That Cinderella carriage that they carved out of the watermelon was beautiful. And the bride started crying. And I was like, and she was like, this is where I say, it's just how the other half lives, you know? She was like, a Cinderella carriage? It was supposed to be carved into a rose. And I was like, what? I just thought that was so funny. I don't know. It's one of those things. I understand that at weddings, you know, you put so much money and time and effort into planning these things. And so you want those details to be perfect. But, you know, when it comes down to being upset about the way in which your watermelon was carved at the top of your fruit tower, it's just not something I can relate to. So I thought that was kind of a funny one. Okay, this one says, when and where did you get OC? She's adorable. Yes, she is adorable. Thank you. Basically, March 2020, world shuts down and we were both home from work. And I really had wanted a dog for quite a while at that point. So we thought it was probably a good time to start looking, since we thought we'd be home for a couple of weeks. And so we looked and couldn't find any dogs in the shelters. We were looking for a rescue dog, and fortunately, all of them were taken. So that was awesome. But we really felt like if we didn't get a dog then during that time when we were both home and able to train and take care of a puppy, it was just not going to happen. So it wound up being in July. We were still home. And again, we thought we were going back to work very soon after that. We wound up not. And, but we did decide that it was just time. If we could get a dog then and there, we would. So we found her from a breeder in Pennsylvania, and she is a cockapoo. She is the cutest, bestest little baby ever. She is now 4 years old, and we absolutely adore her. So yeah, she's from Pennsylvania, and we got her back in 2020. Okay, I think that these will be a good couple of questions to end on here. A little bit more knitting related. So the first one is, I'm curious about what your favorite crochet project has been. What was it and why was it your favorite? As both a knitter and crocheter, I have been curious for a while about your past crochet projects. So I think off the top of my head, I do have quite a few favorite crochet projects. It was really the first thing that helped me to go from seeing things in my head and being able to translate them into something wearable. But I think if I had to say my favorite, I would say the first garment that I crocheted was this big, cozy bobble crochet sweater. I made that during, I think that was 2020 or 2021. We were home and I was having yarn delivered to the house from Michael's, and I was shocked by how much yarn that project used up, but I found a video on YouTube with the tutorial and I bought the pattern for it, and it wound up being massive. I'll definitely put in a photo here. But basically, it taught me how to do these bobble stitches, which I wound up just going crazy with. And next thing you know, I was just crocheting everything with the bobbles. But I love that sweater. I keep it in my car, and it's perfect for, it's acrylic. It's perfect for when I'm out and about. And if we go, you know, listen to some music somewhere or just out later and it gets chilly, I love having that in the car to throw on. It's like a giant blanket, and I always get compliments when I wear it, but I think it's only because it's just so huge. It's very much a statement piece. But I love that one. Okay, and then the final question that I will end on here says, what prompted you to start a knitting channel? As in, what was the final push that made you think I should actually do this? I like this question because I do feel like it was a very thought out thing for me. Basically, I was watching knitting podcasts before I started knitting, and I felt like it was really helpful for me to watch those knitting podcasts. I was interested in knitting, but always felt like it was too difficult for me to learn. And so I picked up on a lot of the sort of lingo and the tech, you know, the terms for different things by watching the knitting podcasts. But I also had like this sort of running list of frustrations with some of them while I was watching. And it was just, you know, my own, oh, I wish that they did this. I wish that they did this. Then started knitting in January on New Year's Day of 2023. The first podcast that I put out was on September 9th of 2023. So I hadn't even been knitting a full year at that point. But as I got more into knitting and kept watching knitting podcasts, I really started being more conscious of the things that I was finding a little bit frustrating with some of the podcasts that I was watching. And there were things that I felt like were in my ability to do differently. And like I said, I had this gear, so I already had that kind of head start on things. And I knew that I was comfortable editing videos. And it really came down to wanting to see a podcast where someone was talking about the ups and the downs of the knitting and the mistakes, working through the mistakes, but also showing a beginner trying things. Because I also felt like anytime I walked into a yarn shop or something and said that I was looking for yarn to knit a sweater, and when they found out how long I had been knitting for, it was a lot of pushback of like, you're not ready for that. And I felt frustrated by that because I felt really confident in that as a beginner, you can knit whatever you want to knit. As long as you can knit and purl, it's just bigger stretches of those stitches. It's just doing more of them over more time and more space. And maybe small percentages of these patterns have something different in between. But if you know how to do a knit stitch and a purl stitch, if you know how to cast on and bind off, you can 100% knit anything that you want to knit. You just have to know that along the way, you're going to have to figure out a few other little things. But the majority of projects are just those very simple stitches. So I really felt like I wanted to show a beginner trying those things, trying new things. And that was just really important to me from before day one. as well as little things like really wishing that I could see photos of what a pattern's supposed to look like on the screen, or knowing how much a yarn costs and how much a project costs. I just felt like for beginners in particular, those things were a little bit underrepresented in the podcast world. And so after making a long list of things that I wanted to see, I decided I would just sit down and make a podcast and incorporate all of those things that I wished I had seen before. So that was really the final push. And I set a date that I said I'm going to put out a podcast video on this day. So I'm going to film it a week beforehand, and no matter what, that video has to go up at 9:30 a.m. on September 9th, because if I didn't do that, I was going to chicken out. So I set the date and time, and I said it does not matter what state it's in before that, it has to go up. And I'm really glad that that was what I did. So that was the kind of final push. And I'm really grateful that I did. So I do feel like I've gone on chatting for so long now. Thank you so much for asking your questions. Like I said, let me know if you want to see this kind of incorporated into the Try It On Tubing and Chat segment. And if that's the case, maybe we'll just start incorporating into the comments weekly a question portion. I don't know. You guys let me know what you want to see. This is your channel. Anyway, I think that that is all I have. If you enjoyed this video, I would so very much appreciate it if you would go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you subscribe and ring the bell, you'll be notified anytime I post a new video. However, I do post a podcast video just like this one every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. All right. All that being said, big ol' thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. All right, you guys. Bye.